Okay, so it doesn't look like we're changing from 21, so we can probably just start now, actually. I will basically have our panelists introduce themselves. I will also introduce myself, and then we'll start answering questions. So Megan, why don't you start us off?
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm a junior in Pauli Murray College. I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm studying environmental engineering and also double majoring in global affairs with a certificate in energy studies. Outside of academics and my work as an engineering tour guide, I dedicate a lot of my time to doing research. So I work in an air quality lab in the environmental engineering department that focuses on the emissions of organic aerosols to the atmosphere and kind of the atmospheric chemistry that's involved with their reactions and transformations. I also work for the Yale program on climate change communication. I'm a peer tutor for the intro-level physics course, and I'm on the masthead of the Yale Scientific Magazine. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool, thanks Megan. George, why don't you go?
Hi everyone, very nice to be here with you all. My name is George. I'm a junior as well in Silliman College, studying molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. That's what the MCDB stands for at the tail of my name. And I'm also a pre-medical student. I'm currently on a leave of absence for this semester, but I'm going to keep saying that I'm a junior for this year, and then I'm going to start saying that I'm a senior next year. I am outside of academics. I do a lot of work with the admissions office. I work as a science tour guide, as a campus tour guide, and I do some student presenter series as well. And I do a lot of work with the international students community as an international student myself. I'm originally from a city in Greece called Thessaloniki, where I'm currently tuning in from. And I also do a lot of work with the International Relations Association at Yale, a lot of model United Nations things, and do some research and global health work with a global health professor I had in Liberia, and some volunteering in Yale New Haven Hospital and local New Haven middle schools. But that's a bit about me.
Cool, thank you, George. And then Evan, why don't you go?
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in this Saturday. My name's Evan. I'm a junior studying biomedical engineering. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, so much more warmer weather than up here in the Northeast now. I'm also studying data science as a certificate, which is sort of like Yale's de facto minor. And I'm in Saybrook College, one of the 14 residential colleges at Yale. So they're just like sort of dormitory communities that we will certainly dive into deeper in this great discussion we'll have. And on campus, I'm involved with biotechnology groups, public health groups. I do research in biostatistics, and I also work for a digital therapeutics company. And you know, as Kessie said, we're more than happy to answer any questions you have. Just plug them into the Q&A feature on the Zoom, and we'll spend the next hour answering them. So, thank you.
Cool, so I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name is Kessie. I am a senior at Yale this year. I am in Davenport College. I'm studying neuroscience. I'm also pre-medical, and I have a certificate in Chinese language. I guess outside of academics, I am a STEM tour guide just like George. I also do research at the Caffrey Lab where we study traumatic brain and spinal cord injury in the CST and in the motor cortex, which is a fun, exciting topic. I'm also happy to talk more about that. Obviously, I'm getting excited about it already, so please ask me about my research, just begging you. I also am on the board for YNeuro, which is the neuroscience affiliate club for the neuroscience major. I'm the VP. I also am a FROCO this year, so I'm a first-year counselor, basically part of the welcoming FROCO, welcoming first years to Yale, experience is your FROCO, so that's me for Davenport. And I also dance with Rhythmic Blue, which is a hip hop and urban dance team on Yale's campus. So nice to meet all of you. Oh, I forgot one more thing. Wow. I'm a bio peer tutor for the introductory biology sequence. I've been doing that since my sophomore year. All right, cool. So we can just jump right into some of these questions. There are a lot of engineering questions. So I don't know if Evan or Megan want to jump right in. One of the questions is, how do you feel about learning engineering in a liberal arts environment, and what makes Yale engineering special?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question and a great sort of starting point, because I think underlying it elucidates a lot of the, I think, benefits of a Yale education. So yeah, Yale is a liberal arts school, so we have to take classes that are outside of our STEM majors, which is great. We have writing requirements, we have to take a certain number of humanities credits, we have a language requirement. And sort of all of these things highlight the kind of multifaceted education you'll have. And one of the principal reasons I chose Yale was because I could be surrounded by, history majors and English majors. They're absolutely brilliant, right? And sort of the discussions you'll be able to have over a meal is remarkable. And I think the fruits of being in that diverse environment, as opposed to maybe going to an engineering school where there might be 300 students in your introductory class and you're all sort of following a similar path. Granted, there are advantages to that, but I think nevertheless, being in an environment where you have such a diverse student pool and everyone is so remarkably talented in the things they do, I think is great, and you really sort of feed off that energy.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Evan has said, but one of the main things that drew me to Yale engineering is that, students here can pursue engineering without being restricted to just engineering. As a liberal arts school, Yale kind of embodies this interdisciplinary learning, and we're all encouraged to take classes that in other fields in order to diversify our experiences here. And Yale engineers are well-rounded. We're not stuck in a bubble, I think it's especially important as an engineer to not only master, the rigorous technical side of things, but also understand how engineering fits into, for example, the social sciences or the humanities. I mentioned that I'm double majoring in global affairs, so I can, I have access to all these econ classes, that cover, diplomacy and multilateralism, taught by top-notch faculty, and so that's one thing that really drew me to Yale, and it's because we're exposed to a variety of disciplines, and we get the best of both worlds, essentially.
Cool, thank you guys. So another question, what sort of specific research have we been able to do? So I guess maybe we can take turns talking about our research opportunities.
Cassie, do you want to go first? You were so excited to talk about your research.
Well, I would love to. So basically, I've been doing research in this lab since I was in my sophomore summer. I did YSS and research and then just continued after the summer was over. This is the only lab I've been in at Yale, so I don't know if anyone else has shifted labs or can talk about the experience of going from lab to lab, but essentially my lab is also partnered with another lab that studies a similar topic. We more specifically study neuroregeneration and the spontaneous regenerative capacity of neurons in the CST. So basically when you get an injury, say you sustain a really, God forbid, sustain a very serious spinal cord injury, typically what a doctor will say is, you're never going to walk again, or the chances of you walking again are basically zero. But what we actually see in practice are that with rehab, a lot of people can regain function in their leg, can regain feeling in their leg and sensation. And so my lab is basically trying to bridge the gap between those two phenomena. The fact that studying neurons in a lab, they really don't regenerate very readily. Once they're broken, they're basically broken for good. But in practice, neurons really do have plasticity and spontaneous recovery, and you can get a lot of function back that way. So I guess dealing into more of our experimental method, we basically studied this system in mice. We used 2-photon microscopy and a bunch of fluorescence to live image mice as they perform a walking task. Some of these mice have sustained injury to the spinal cord. We usually do periodontomy. We also have a team doing spinal cord crush, which is supposed to simulate a car accident or something like that. And then and some of our mice don't, and we basically have these mice perform this walking task where they're grasping rungs, which is a fine motor skill on a rotating wheel. And as they do that, we basically, sorry mice, but we create a tiny hole in their head so we can image their neurons as they're doing the task. And we look for changes in this function, basically before injury, right after injury, and as they have more rehab. So that's been really awesome. It's super cool. I think a really hot topic right now in neuroscience is neurodegenerative diseases. And so it's kind of cool to be on the opposite side of that, like thinking about once neurons, do degenerate, if they do, how can we get that function back? And so I've been really blessed to do this research, and I'm hoping to stay with the regenerative family past Yale, or explore other interests. Like I also have an interest in like epilepsy and sort of diseases of that nature. Yeah.
I can talk a bit about my research experience as well, and maybe give a bit more context as well on, I guess, because I know we got a bunch of questions on this, on how we undergrads get to do research, how easy it is for undergrads to do research. So I'm going to also kind of talk from this more so biology perspective, but also kind of come in with some public health nuances too, and then maybe Megan and Evan can talk a bit more about the engineering research of it all. Okay, so first off, I think it's very important to say that research opportunities are extremely readily available to undergrads at Yale. Just to give you an understanding of how common it is for STEM students to do research, almost 99% of the students that pursue a STEM degree at Yale actually end up doing some type of research throughout their time at Yale. I did some research as a first year after the summer of my first year that was fully funded by Yale. I chose a lab in the Yale School of Medicine, and that's another super important point. Being a student at Yale means that you have access not only to Yale College departments, but also the departments of every graduate school that is affiliated with Yale. And the Yale School of Medicine has tons and tons of labs. Yale is one of the biggest producers of biology research in the world. So there's just tons of opportunities for you to do research in that field. I also did research in a neuroscience lab during my first year summer. I worked in looking at the connectivity between two different areas of the brain, I guess some optical areas and a part of your brain called the striatum. I actually didn't continue doing research during the academic year with that lab, and I'm now looking into joining a new lab in the neuroimmunology side of things. And so I'd say that there's definitely so much liberty and so much freedom for you to not only join the lab in the first place, but also to go in and test whether the lab is actually a good space for you. All it takes for you to really join a lab is to email the professor saying, I'm really interested in the research that you're doing. Could we set up a time to talk about me potentially joining your lab? And most of the time, the professors are going to be responding to you in the affirmative, but even if they don't, they're probably going to be suggesting some other potential faculty you can reach out to. So there's really tons and tons of flexibility in terms of both you finding a lab that works for you, but also finding opportunities that are going to be good for you in terms of your academic development at Yale. So I guess to sum it all up, research at Yale is extremely accessible. You get to do it not only in Yale College, but also in the different graduate schools that exist around Yale. You get funding from Yale to do research. You can do research for credit, at least in the biology majors most of the time after your junior year. That varies for some other majors too. But also, like, research is not purely focused on biology. There's tons and tons of other areas of research that Yale is focused on. Doing some public health work with a professor that is not really it does not really involve any wet lab stuff, as we call it. So I don't really go into a lab and kind of like look at cells or do microscopy or pipette things. It's more so looking at papers, reading through papers, and I'm actually working on some educational initiatives more so. So I guess there's tons of variability in the research you can do and tons of opportunities. But yeah, hope that kind of gives you some more context.
Yeah, George covered it really well. It's incredibly easy, also in engineering. You don't need any previous experience to get involved. For me, I cold emailed one of the professors in the environmental engineering department the fall semester of my first year. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do research, so I just emailed him out of the blue, and we met like a couple days later to chat. And I started doing research in his lab also this summer after my first year in the same fellowship that George did, the first year fellowship. And I've been working in that same lab, the air quality lab, for almost 2 years now. So to say a little bit more about the specific research I do, a project that I'm currently working on with the group is characterizing reactive chemical emissions from oil sands operations in Canada. So the Alberta oil sands, if you can if you've visually like seen them somewhere, they're this massive, patch of land where oil processing takes place. So what's really cool about this study is that people in Canada, at a government agency in Canada, they flew these planes over the oil sands region, and they collected these emissions samples in these little tubes, and we brought that back to the lab, and we put them through gas chromatography, mass spectrometry to process those emissions, and we can actually see the molecular level composition of the various hydrocarbons and organic species that are within those air samples. So basically, I'm just quantifying the magnitude and the chemical composition of these, gas phase compounds because they're currently poorly understood, and we're just trying to elucidate the mixture because it has not only public health implications if you breathe that stuff in, but it can also impact the climate through radiative forcing. So that's what I've been doing for the past year or so. And it's great to work with other undergrads and graduate students in the group, and they were all so welcoming to me, and it just shows how accessible research at Yale is.
Yeah, that's great. I think most of, particularly George, kind of in terms of logistics, outline most things. I guess important other details would be a lot of, just from my sort of anecdotal experience, a lot of students don't jump right in the fall of their first year with research. That's awesome, Megan did, and I super applaud that. But I know I was very disorganized. I didn't really know, it was such a new experience for me. So a common path is kind of spending the fall getting adjusted to college, and then there's great opportunities the summer after your first year. There's a first year fellowship grant that I think I did, and it seems like Megan and George did as well. That's a great opportunity. And there's also something called the STARS program. That's another opportunity for the summer after your first year. So you could think maybe as sort of a timeline that could be replicated, explore fall and then think about research opportunities for the spring. And then in the spring, you would apply for these fellowship opportunities during the summer. And that's sort of your maybe stepping stone into a lot of solid research opportunities for the remainder of your undergrad. And I think that structure is really great because that's what I did. I didn't really know if I was going to go into research, but I saw the grants in the fellowship, and I thought it was a great opportunity. Quickly, the research that I was involved in was nanoparticles that were being optimized for gene editing therapy for cystic fibrosis and broadly any kind of disease that can be easily targeted with one sort of genetic manipulation. It's a really exciting research in that whole gene editing space. So now, of course, with COVID, it sort of limits in lab experiences. So I've kind of shifted my focus now to more biostatistics and just analyzing genome sequences from my computer. And also on the side, I do deep learning research for a company. But that kind of knowledge that I got came from Yale. So even though I'm a biomedical engineering, you can take CS classes and learn about techniques that are sort of broadly applicable across STEM disciplines.
Cool, thanks guys. Another question, so for our engineering folks, your favorite faculty member in the College of Engineering? Or in your major rather, since there isn't a distinct college.
I guess sort of first thing that comes to mind, there is a professor who's also a PI. A PI stands for Principal Investigator, and that's like the dude or gal who runs a lab. And that's the sort of person that files the grants, and they're typically the established researcher. So the PI that I worked for is also the head of college for Jonathan Edwards, which is one of the 14 residential colleges. So his name is Mark Saltzman, but he's really involved on campus, and he's so nice. And it's always an open door policy with him. If you have any questions, or if you're interested in his research and just want to chat, he's always willing to spend a meal or have coffee with you. So he's sort of the first one that comes to mind. But I think broadly, with the engineering profs here, if you're interested in their research, I'd say 80 to 90% of them will absolutely, certainly reply back, but moreover be interested in, having you work in their lab. So that typically isn't a barrier.
Yeah, it's just hard to, to choose one. But I'll take my PI, so my research professor, out of this because conflict of interest. But I would say, well, the environmental engineering department, I know all the faculty because, it's a close-knit group, so we all get to know each other. There are only like 7 professors, I think. But there's this one professor who I took water quality control with my sophomore year. His name is Jae-Hong Kim. And that was one of my favorite classes I've ever taken in the major, even though it doesn't really have to do with my specific research focus, which is more in terms of air. But first of all, it was a really small class, so it was like 17 people, which fostered a tight-knit group, and it was super easy to meet other students in the major. And the professor, Professor Kim, he made a commitment on the very first day. He was like, I'm going to get lunch with all of you students at least once throughout the semester, which just showed how much he cared about getting to know his students. So that was really nice. Got to eat lunch with him a couple times, talk about things outside of academics. And a fun little anecdote, it was really nice outside one afternoon, back when we were all on campus. But we spontaneously decided, this was a fall class, so it was before the snow, but we spontaneously decided to actually get bubble tea and have class outside in Silliman College in the courtyard. And I just remember we were sitting on the grass with our notebooks while Professor Kim was deriving a bunch of mass balance equations and derivations on this portable whiteboard that we lugged outside, and it was a great time. So that was an amazing class with an amazing professor who, gets to know all his students personally, which is always a plus.
Cool. The next question is, what are the STEM class sizes like at Yale? Anyone can elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to kind of give you the statistics, I guess, of classes at Yale, and then kind of give you more of my empirical experience with most of the STEM classes I've taken, and mostly, I guess, not so much engineering, but science departments. So first and foremost, I think it's important to note that there are big lecture classes at Yale, and many of the introductory biology courses, chemistry courses are going to be on the larger scale of classes. So you may have classes that are going to be around 200 students, 100 students. My introductory chemistry class, I took, I guess, a bit of a more peculiar version of introductory chemistry, and it was around 70, 80 people, taught by just an amazing professor, one of my favorite people on earth. So you really get to have introductory classes like that, 70, 90 people that still meet an auditorium, still ask questions on a much more lecture style type of thing. But then you also get to have classes like the introductory biology sequence, which is around 200 people, per semester or so. But what's amazing about Yale, I think, is how the classes kind of start getting smaller and smaller as you move out of those introductory courses. And I mean, innately, those courses will be large just because everyone that kind of like majors in the biological sciences, like Evan had to take the introductory biology sequence, even though he's a biomedical engineer. I had to take the introductory biology sequence, even though I'm an NCDB major. Cassie had to do it too. So, there are so many people that need to take these classes, but then we kind of part on our separate ways. And in that sense, you get to have classes that are more so seminar-style classes. And seminar-style classes are capped at 18 to 20 students maximum, and those are the classes where you really get to meet the professors. I also had an amazing experience in one of my first-year seminar classes, which was a cancer biology seminar. So first-year seminars are essentially a special program that Yale has. It essentially draws some of the best professors from across disciplines, and it caps those seminars to around 18 people. And you get to experience kind of like some of the best professors during your first year teaching about something that they're extremely passionate about. So you really get to find classes that range from anything from like 10 and 18 students to all the way up to 200. And I've personally found that an extremely great way to experience both kind of like the really like lecture style type of college, but also the smaller scale, more closer-knit. Closer-knit classes. But I think last thing I'm going to say, very important to note, is that even in your big classes, you never really feel like you're drowning in the crowd. There's so many forms of support, anywhere from the professor to peer tutors. Like, I think everyone here said that they're peer tutoring in some way or form, to your teaching assistants, to academic advisors outside of the courses. There's just so many ways in which you can get to feel engaged with all the courses, no matter how large they are at Yale. And I'm going to pass it on to anyone else who wants to comment.
I'll just say something really quickly about the sizes. For me, I also had to take those intro STEM courses, so biology, chemistry, physics, calculus. But then as you work your way up and take more upper level courses, they do get smaller. Environmental engineering, I mentioned, like when my classes had 17 students, they're usually less than 20. I think this semester all of my core classes are less than 15. And so yeah, there are definitely smaller ones where you can, that are more intimate, and you get to know the professors and know everyone else in the class, so you can work together. But yeah, that's a common thing for a lot of the more advanced classes as you move up the major, basically.
Yeah, there's a question about specifically about engineering format and whether or not Yale engineers you feel are collaborative workers. If you guys, since this is related, you guys want to just touch on that briefly, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. From my experience, the environment here is very collaborative, which I've only been to one college, so I can't speak about other colleges, but I feel like it's pretty special. When I was in high school, right, when we had homework assignments, I worked with people, but at the end of the day, like I still could try to do all the problems by myself, and you'd ask the teacher if you had a question. But I think at Yale and in college in general, we call them P sets in STEM, but just problem sets or homework. But it's really it kind of like requires you working with friends on problems, because they're tricky. They're written to be pretty tricky. So the professor will give you maybe 5 questions a week or every 2 weeks, and a lot of times they're not just pulled from a textbook. They're pretty difficult questions that are meant to kind of engage critical thinking. So it's great that Yale is super collaborative, and I've heard kind of horror stories from colleges, and horror, of course, being exaggeratory, but in colleges where there's a curve where kind of your success depends on the relative success of others. And it sets up a dynamic where some people aren't very enthusiastic to help other people. And that can kind of contribute to a suboptimal culture. But that's definitely not the case at Yale. Like you quickly form a group of friends that you'll work together with for the semester on difficult problems. And I think that's great. And you sort of bond through that experience. So most of them, and talking about the format, some of the intro sequences the first year that you might take can be somewhat sizable, 50 to 100, rarely above 100, I'd say. There aren't many classes that are bigger than that at Yale. But now that we're kind of juniors and seniors and we see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's hard to believe it goes so fast. A lot of our classes are smaller. Like the BME major has about 30 students, and now I've kind of formed a close-knit group. That kind of reminds me of high school. You really get to know the people in your major if you're in some of these kind of engineering subspecialties. So it's really collaborative, and most of the classes, I'd say, are pretty small, maybe 20 to 40 students.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely more collaborative, and this is coming from me who came from, kind of a competitive high school. And I'll just provide like one specific example of the intro physics course, which is required for, I think, all engineers, because it's very near and dear to my heart because I do peer tutor that class. But basically, in physics 180, we get those P-sets every week, and they're not easy to do. So there are actually study halls and office hours every single weekday at this building on campus called 17 Hill House. It's in this huge classroom with a bunch of round tables where everyone works together, and there are TAs, so grad students, who help out, as well as peer tutors, so upperclassmen who have taken the course before, and everyone just gathers there to work on the P-sets together, ask for help, meet new people, and working on a P-set together with other people is truly the best way to actually get it done on time and do well on it. So that those study halls and office hours are just one example of how collaborative everything is. All the STEM classes are, and yeah, there's always a bunch of support available if you need it.
Cool. So there's a question about being pre-med at Yale. So I'm pre-med. I think George also said he's pre-med. So I think we can both sort of elaborate quickly on that. I can start. So being pre-med here, the person referred to it correctly as a track. It's not a major. It's just a track. What that kind of means is like you can jump on and off the track at any time. There's also, it's different to how you maybe would declare your major, which is like you need to go and make sure that everyone knows that you are this major, and it's written on your diploma. That doesn't really exist for being pre-medical here. It's basically just a list of recommended courses that Yale believes will set you up really well for the MCAT and for med school more broadly. So a lot of those classes are, basically the requirements that we all have memorized by now for the MCAT and for med school, which is, a year of biology, a year of organic chemistry, a year of regular chemistry, a year of physics, all the labs associated with that, etc. There are a lot of ways to sort of fulfill those. I think the typical tracks are like the typical tracks are like, you take introductory physics, introductory biology, etc. But if you come in at a certain level and you want to sort of push past the introductory level, there's nothing directly correlated to a requirement. So if you wanted to fulfill your biology year using a different kind of biology, it's totally viable and doable. It really does also boil down to the specific school you're applying to and what they're looking for in a candidate. In terms of my experience being pre-med, I think that I kind of consider it as like almost a second major sometimes. It's not a double major, so it's not a major, but I think in terms of the course load, I have a typical strategy to double majors, which is trying to find courses that can satisfy both things at one time. So believe it or not, there's not a lot of overlap between neuroscience, the requirements for neuroscience and the requirements for being pre-medical, which sucks. But what that means is oftentimes if I'm like looking at a class and it only satisfies one or the other, I'll try to look for classes that do both so that I kind of cut down on the amount of credits I need to take overall to graduate. I think that's the only sort of like logistical thing that I have to think about when I'm signing up for classes. But other than that, it's a very sort of non-structured program, which I actually like. And there's structure when you need it. So a lot of the time people will sort of turn to academic advisors who can keep in mind that the student is pre-med or that they're interested in, say, MD, PhD or things like that. But there's also a lot of pre-med students lean on the Office of Career Strategies, which has a lot of resources for lots of pre-professional students. So like if you're thinking of engineering school, if you're thinking of law school, med school, there are different sort of functional arms of the Office of Career Strategies that help with that. But for pre-med specifically, that's a really good resource for just, going to someone and being like, am I on track? Like, is everything okay? Alternatively, they can not be there at all. You can pretend you don't know who they are. You can go every day. Like this, it's sort of up to you, the amount of help that you want. And the amount of structure that you want your sort of pre-med experience to have. But other than that, it really is just like taking a number of courses that sort of prep you well for the MCAT. And there's also some courses that aren't on there, but that we sort of all agree is a good prep for an MCAT or for med school. So like a popular one I'm thinking of is like the physiology class that's pretty popular here. That's not on the list, but like a lot of people will take that as prep for these things. But yeah, that's sort of a testament to the fact that there's not a lot of structure. And so if you decide one day, I don't want to be pre-med, then you can just pretend like you're not pre-med and nothing ever happened. Alternatively, if you decide kind of late in your college career, I think I want to go to med school, then, people can walk you through the process of getting the things you need to be a competitive candidate.
I think Cassie did a terrific job of covering everything really pre-med related at Yale, and I think she did a very good job at kind of like describing that it is not really kind of like a formal commitment in any sense. It's a lot about personal choice. I think the difference in between, I guess, my path being pre-med and Cassie's path being pre-med is the fact that MCDB is really a major that, in a sense, seems to many times kind of like really just check all of the boxes of being of the pre-med courses you have to take, just because there's just so much overlap. Like you have to do a year of biology, you have to do a year of chemistry, you have to do a year of organic chemistry, physics, all of those things that are required to be a pre-medical student, you kind of fulfill through the major. And that definitely is an added plus, but that is not to say that students that are not even STEM majors cannot be pre-med. I have friends that are history majors that are at the same time doing pre-med, and I think a great thing about Yale is, again, touching back to this notion of liberal arts. You have the ability to really kind of like craft your own academic path at Yale, and so. If you're fulfilling your distributional requirements, kind of like the way in which the core curriculum is structured at Yale, but not really core curriculum, you just take courses that you would like within 6 different areas, 6 different academic areas. If you fulfill those, if you fulfilled your major requirements, you're left with almost 1/3 of your courses, or I guess a bit less if you're a STEM major, that are there for you to kind of experiment on, and many times you can use those as kind of like those courses we call electives as pre-med courses that you want to take. So I think it's being pre-med at Yale, you're given tons of flexibility, you're given tons of opportunities, and I think it's important to mention that like being pre-med is not only about academics, it's also about kind of like all the things to do on the side. So anything from like extracurricular activities you want to pursue, volunteering in hospital, research that you want to do, all those things we touched upon. There's just so many ways in which you can do those at Yale. And I think it's important to, again, push for the notion that there's no specific, I guess, path that you have to follow. You really shape your pre-med experience. Obviously, there are some requirements, but it's terrific to just be an art history major, loving to, I don't know, talk about the environment and do some environmental research and at the same time be pre-med. So tons of flexibility there.
There was a related question on whether or not being pre-med is compatible with pursuing a major in engineering. So I don't know if you guys want to just quickly, while we're on the subject, talk about that too.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I was also pre-med until last month, so that sort of changed. And it's a testament to what Cassie was saying. There's no formal declaration. Or you can go open the window and say, I am no longer pre-med or I am pre-med, but you don't have to tell Yale that. So it's just a matter of taking the classes you want. So I have taken all the pre-med prereqs, I guess. But I sort of, you can evaluate even after you've taken all the classes, right? That maybe PhD is more interesting, or maybe employment right after graduating is more interesting to you. So I was trying to do the mental math. I think BME, of course, as you can imagine, of the engineering majors aligns a lot with like what you need for pre-med. But I think I needed to take 4 more classes outside of my major in order to say, I've ticked off all the suggested boxes for what classes are recommended for, pre-medical studies. So 4 more classes to kind of do that. So it is totally feasible. For other engineering majors, I don't know if Megan can maybe speak to the overlap for environmental engineering in pre-med, but particularly for BME, there's a lot. So I only had to do 4 more classes. So it's very feasible.
As for the overlap for environmental engineering and pre-med, I know one person who was pre-med. She graduated last year. I think she's going to Hopkins, but she okay. So we do have to take intro chemistry. So as I said, all the intro STEM courses. We don't have to take organic chemistry, so that's a big one that if you're pre-med, you have to take outside of the major. But I mean, it's feasible because I know someone who did very well and was pre-med. So I don't know all the specifics, though. I don't exactly know what the pre-med requirements are.
Cool. Let's see. So there have been a couple questions about environmental engineering, and I think Megan, you got a specific question about your daily schedule as a double major, so maybe we can push those 2 together and just have you talk a bit about your experience as a double major and in the EE department.
Yeah, for sure. I'll first talk about, I'll expand on Yale environmental engineering. So basically, we're more of an interdisciplinary major, but so if you're in a major, you can either pursue a BA or a BS. A BA, Bachelor of Arts, it's slightly fewer credits than a BS, and it's intended for people who want, the technical background in environmental engineering, but might not be an environmental engineer after graduation. So you might go into law or business or medicine. And the BS, the Bachelor of Science degree program, includes more credits, and it's intended for students who might go to grad school in environmental engineering or go directly into industry. But basically, the environmental engineering department it's split into, I guess, several fields. So we have faculty and courses that focus on air. We have some that focus on water and wastewater treatment, and then also public health. And so you can take courses in the major with any of these faculty, and a lot of the required courses actually focus on different parts of sustainability. So engineering technology, global health, economics, energy, that sort of thing. As for the flow of the major, you start off your first year by taking all these intro STEM courses. There's Intro to Environmental Engineering that's offered in the spring of your first year. It's taught by John Fortner, who's the Director of Undergraduate Studies, so that's a great way to know him and learn more about the major through that. And then as you progress, you take more of the core classes. So as I mentioned before, water quality control. There's also air pollution control, thermodynamics, environmental transport processes, which is kind of like fluid mechanics, green engineering and sustainable design, which usually takes place in the CEID, the Center for engineering, innovation, and design, where you actually design and build your own sustainable product, which is really cool, but it's not being offered right now for obvious reasons. So that's just a taste of the core classes that you'll be taking as you progress through the major. As I mentioned before, it's close-knit. You get to know everyone really easily. And then I'll also talk about my experience double majoring. So my double major is in global affairs, and there is not a lot of overlap at all between the two majors, but I've made it work. So basically, I typically take 5 classes per semester. Yale students usually take 4 to 5 classes, which translates to 4 to 5 credits, but I need to get all my requirements and classes in, so I do take 5 classes. And they're split between engineering and global affairs. So this semester I'm taking 3 global classes and then 2 engineering classes. Last semester I did 4 engineering classes and 1 political science seminar that was called Politics of the Environment, which is very up my alley, and I enjoyed it a lot. But I just basically split my course load each semester, and so far it has worked. I think I'm on track to graduate, knock on wood, but it's definitely feasible to double major in 2 fields that don't have a lot of overlap. Just make sure you plan out your schedule well and talk to your advisors, who can be really helpful in helping you find classes that fit the requirements and also schedule them well in terms of your trajectory. But yeah, definitely feasible.
Cool. So we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to squeeze in as many questions as possible. There's a more broader question about the culture of campus and dorm life, extracurricular opportunities, etc. So I think the best way to sort of answer that is just anecdotally, like we can all sort of talk about our experiences maybe in our friend groups or like places we like to go on campus and things like that. So I can just quickly start. So I think a really good way that I have conceptualized our culture here is like humanity or like human. So I was describing this to someone else the other day. I think that like, unfortunately, like, Yale, like a lot of other Ivy schools or schools of this caliber, have like a predominant work culture where, we sometimes sort of succumb to the pressure of like feeling like, oh, I need to be productive at all times. The one thing I can say, like, I think Yale does a phenomenal job of, specifically Yale like students and Yale faculty members, is rejecting that culture. So it's really saying like, if you need a break, take a break. If you want to go on a walk, let's go. If you want to like go eat ice cream all day, let's do that. And that's something that really appealed to me as a stressed senior in high school who really wanted to push back against the idea of like, oh, I need to be like constantly producing a product without really sacrificing like the quality of my education. So I think like the culture here is like, we all love to learn and we all love to push ourselves and we all love to succeed, but we also like appreciate our respective humanity, and we also like appreciate the fact that we're not all just a bundle of numbers like constantly churning out products. And so I think it brings lots of quality to our work. I think it brings lots of it brings interest, like it makes our work interesting. And it means that we're all like a pretty close like community. I feel like there is rarely a Yale student who I cannot walk up to and be like, I don't know you, but let's talk, or something of that sort. So that's sort of like my opinion of like dorm life. I think that translates to the residential college system that people can sort of talk more about. That's like I can talk like an hour about that on its own, but I think that's sort of like the predominant culture is like there are little pockets of like, we're nerds, we like to play sports, like whatever typical like, college culture you might see on TV. But I think the overarching like distinctive quality about Yale is just that like we are human and we like to achieve, but we also like to recognize that we're human and that like we need, rest and recovery, and that we can sort of move at the pace that life has, required us to sometimes move at, like right now. If anyone else wants to share.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think what Cassie said is really, really just very representative of what Yale stands for. I think I'm going to add to that by saying that what I've loved the most about the Yale community is the fact that, or my Yale experience and the culture on campus is the fact that Yale really feels like a community. As Cassie said, really like love the fact that I can be walking up and down campus and I can bump into people and I can just say hi. And I can get to meet new people all the time because there's enough of us so that we can meet each other all the time. But I can also keep bumping onto people I know all the time because there's, I guess, as few of us as needed for that to happen. And I think that it is within that community that at Yale you have this just beautiful concept of learning from others. And that's one of the things I've appreciated the most. I think obviously we all have appreciated learning things in our classes, and we've all obviously been gaining tons and tons of knowledge through them, but also we've all learned so much from just interacting with our fellow Yaleys. And it's just, I think it's all those things that you can just sit in a dining hall and just organically have a conversation starting about, like, I don't know, just the randomest thing, and then that conversation can morph into a very serious conversation about the future of humanity if we don't act on climate change. So I think that transition at Yale happens so organically. I keep noticing that over and over again when I come back home, and I can't really do that with people. I can't really just sit down with everyone I know around me and just go from talking about something very trivial to organically move into talking about like contemplating life. And that really happens at Yale so often. And you get to have this phenomenal learning experiences, and the fact that we're all such a diverse community, we come from so many different walks of life, you really get to gain so many perspectives. I mean, I was an international student. I virtually knew almost nothing about the US, and I've grown to know so much just by interacting with people from the US. And I can say the same about these people, learning so much about this tiny country in the Mediterranean that may just know because of like Santorini or Mykonos, you know, and now they kind of like nerd about our history and stuff. So I think this is the beauty of Yale, and I hope that kind of like gives you a sneak peek into the culture of it all.
Yeah, that's great. Certainly, yeah. I think you have a community around your major, and some colleges are structured where you apply to a particular kind of college or institution within the broader name, but at Yale, everything's together. It's all Yale College, and transferring majors is as simple as a drop-down list. So it's all about exploring your own interests, and I think that's a great experience. And because it's a liberal education, you're not like so singularly defined by your major. Like Kessie had mentioned, which I thought is so cool, that she's interested in Chinese studies. So have I sort of found a home at the Chinese department, and being able to kind of explore something completely outside your major has been wonderful. And so I think sort of the fruits of that liberal arts experience, the diverse student body, is what makes Yale very special.
Yeah, everyone has hit on all the points, so I don't want to repeat everything, but I will say that it's so nice to have these, there's just so many opportunities to meet different sets of people. So you have the people in your major, when you're working, you know, on a homework or working in the lab with someone, you get to know them really well. And then there's also, you know, a different set of people in your residential college where you can chat with them while you're eating in the dining hall, or if you go to the Buttery, which is in the basement of the residential colleges where they serve late night food. If you go down there and meet whoever is, you know, playing foosball or watching TV or working on a pizza and chat with them. And it's just, you know, it's so informal, but they're everywhere. And there's so many opportunities to befriend someone, get to know someone better, and talk about anything really at all times of the day. So during the day, if you're in class, or at night in your residential college. So there's just so many opportunities, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah, I think we have time for like one more question. This is a really short one and a sort of interesting one. What's your favorite Yale course been? So I can start. My favorite Yale course is actually not a STEM course, sorry STEM, but it's probably a class I took on fantasy and in literature and film, like the genre. I didn't know anything about fantasy, so I like to read, but like I don't read fantasy books, and so that was really exciting. We just watched movies and like read books and just discussed like what makes something fantastical, like what are we trying to satisfy as like what itch are we trying to scratch by reading fantasy books? And that was just really cool. The dude who teaches it, the professor who teaches it is like such a weird guy. He's got like giant open heart surgery, like scar running down his chest. It's like, so he's such a cool, eccentric man. And he's actually recently, he was on Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And he won, which is really funny. But yeah, that was probably my favorite, like very weird out of the blue, took it randomly class that I ended up really liking. If anyone else wants to quickly share.
Yeah, sure. I can quickly say it's very hard to just pick one class that I really loved at Yale. I'm going to say that one of my favorite classes I've taken is actually a history class, completely outside my major. It was an intellectual history class taught by a professor called Marcy Shore that was actually teaching the class. I took the class this past semester, so it was online, and he was teaching it from Vienna, which was quite wild. And she essentially kind of like, we went over some of the most prominent philosophers and thinkers of modernity, so starting from Enlightenment and going all the way up to, I guess, the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And it was just a profoundly interesting experience because, first and foremost, I had almost no idea about all the ideas we discussed in the class, and it seemed like I'm supposed to know some things about some of the most important thinkers of our times. But also it was so interesting because I was constantly able to draw connections with psychology classes I was taking and biology classes I was taking. And you had all these people from all these different majors kind of sitting around and throwing in their own perspective. We talked about, for example, thinkers that were very anti-science, and all the science majors in the class were revving against that idea. And we were like, no, science, how can you be against science? Science is like one of the greatest things in the world. And then you had the philosophy majors coming in, and they were like, but what if we think about this from kind of like a non-scientific perspective, and is kind of like scientific inquiry the only thing that drives knowledge. So it was just amazing to just get all these different people from all these different walks of life again talking about some of the greatest ideas. And Marcy Shore was just one of the most amazing storytellers I've met. So yeah, all the classes of the class.
Cool. So unfortunately, we are out of time. It's 4:01. We just want to thank you so much for coming and listening to us gush about Yale and how wonderful it is. To the people whose questions we didn't get to, hopefully you'll have a chance to ask at another like webinar. You can go to several. We can also totally I've shared my email with some of you guys specifically for questions about me or the neuroscience major. You can feel free to email me if I did that. But yeah, other than that, we hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your, what day is it? Saturday. And we hope to see you guys maybe at another webinar or at Yale sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.